I think hopefully everyone can hear us. So online people, can someone give a thumbs up if you can sort of see and hear decently? Okay.
Thanks, Van.
Okay, so welcome to the Lakes No More Task Force meeting, and I think what we'll do is do a quick intro of who's here in person, who's with us online, and then we'll get underway. And maybe after we do quick introductions, I'll just remind everyone what's our plan for today, and then we'll dive in. So maybe we'll start with you, Allison. And Allison, you're gonna have to speak be very loud. Microphone is here.
Allison Gutierrez with the Colorado Rockies.
Marguerite Harden, representing residents in HOA.
Becky White, staff with CASA.
Perfect. And actually, we'll do a round of staff after, so let's give Megan and go to Ryan.
Ryan Cole, EcoCycle.
Anna Perks, Perks Construction.
Clayton Sanders, Able Organic.
Top standing, top sitting.
Top standing,
Heidi.
Heidi Panther with the Apartment Association of the Denver Standing.
Stephen Shepard, Building Owners and Managers Association.
Perfect. And then I'm going to hold up on city staff and go to the task force members who are online. So, Erwin, how about you? And then Ben, and then Renee. Erwin, we cannot see or hear you, but we'll come back. We'll come back to you, and hopefully your audio will work. Ben and Renee, and then Chris Woodburn.
Howdy, Van Fussell. I'm here on behalf of the voters, and I'm the founder and director of Compost Colorado.
Thanks, Ben.
Hi, I am Renee Ortiz, Eventful Productions, on behalf of special events in the community.
Thanks, Renee. Chris Woodburn, and then Christy Turner, and then Maggie.
Hi, I'm Chris Woodburn with Denver Public Schools Sustainability.
Hi, Chris. Christy. All right, Christy, we're going to have to come back to you because we don't hear you.
Can you? Yeah. Sorry. Christy Turner, founder and CEO of Scraps.
And hey, Ryan, this is Lori Johnson. I don't think you can see me, I guess, but because I'm driving, I apologize, but I'm on the line. Circular, Colorado.
Since you're with us, since you're introducing yourself, do you mind just reminding people what hat you're wearing? Hat.
Yeah, multiple sectors.
Thank you. All right, Maggie, and then we'll go to Jesse and Ian.
Hi, I'm Maggie Nichols with Iron Woman Construction, and I represented the C&D group.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Jessie Agababian with Unico Properties. I'm a sustainability manager representing the commercial office space.
Thank you. Hi, Jessie. Ian.
Hi, Ian Thomas Tafoya, lead writer and petitioner, representing the petitioners.
Thanks for being here. Okay, let's see. I know that we've got Nick standing in for Sonia. So Nick, you want to say just a quick hello to the representative task force member?
Yeah, thanks. Nick Hoover with the Colorado Restaurant Association, proxy for Sonia Riggs. Appreciate being here.
Is there anyone else who I'm missing online who's a task force member and I'm not seeing? I know there's some members of the public and staff as well.
I think Dan.
Hi, Dan, thanks for being here. I remember that Grace, when Chris Berry had to step off the task force, she asked you to sit in, not officially as a task force member, but just to be an ear and a voice for colors and processes. So processes, and you represent Republic, right? Okay. All right, perfect. I am going to turn to some folks in the room who came in who are task force members and alternates. And can we introduce the council members real quick? Chris Hines, you're eating. We'll go to Sarah Harity.
Hi, Sarah Harity. Zach Burley, who was my husband, and my daughter in the gym.
Nice to see you.
I'm Chris Hines, I serve on City Council as well, representing the Center City District. And we had a fire. You took
department thing this morning, so I'm being casual.
We appreciate all of that. Thank you. Let's see, who else? Brian, Loma. Sorry.
That's okay. Brian Loma, Cut the Plastic. I'm an alternate for the component, so if either of the guys are cut off internet wise, I'm here on site. And yeah.
Thank you. Glad to have you. And then maybe a quick intros of city staff. Blake, do you want to start?
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. It's great to see you all. Blake Adams, Zero Waste and Circular Economy Manager with Kaiser.
Anna Erickson, also with the Zero Waste and Circular Economy team with the city.
Hi, everyone. I'm Natalie. I am on the Zero Waste Circular Economy team as well. I'm also playing Owl today. So we're going to be using this computer as our camera. Thank you. And Becky. Oh, I wasn't ready, but Becky's going to circular economy. Code Box, Denver Office Special Events. Ed Rogers, Executive Officer. Thank you. Megan Sullivan, Office of Special Events. Thank you. Thanks for being here, all of you. Okay, and I know there's city staff online. Thank you all also for being here. And Ian did note, and Ian, we were doing a sound check at the beginning because this room doesn't have an owl, so we have a computer functioning as an owl. So I will remind people in the back, and council members, that's you too, especially if you speak, you just need to really project and almost yell so that they can hear you, and otherwise we'll repeat it. Thank you. Thank you. And so thanks for the patience, folks online, and keep the comments coming in the chat if you're having trouble. Okay. So I thought, Chris, do you want to introduce yourself?
I am Chris Carey on the Patterson Inn Small Business Representative.
Okay, Chris Carey, Patterson Inn, for those who didn't get online. Okay. So I'm going to walk us through our agenda and what we're doing today. And Anna, if and when you want to pull up the PowerPoint, we'll do that, but no rush. So our plan for today, first of all, this task force hasn't met officially since July, when you all developed final edits to a set of recommendations in draft form that went to the public for comment. And then the city had a ton of stuff happening in August to get public comment on that set of recommendations. They put together those comments and you all had a briefing. So we're assuming that you all have either attended the briefing or seen the briefing. There were lots of really pesky reminders. So thank you for doing that. And so we're trusting you have all that background. I know the city's going to reiterate some of it briefly, but again, assuming that you've already, just as a reminder. So the point of today is, our plan is for today to be the meeting where you all, as a task force, act on your draft recommendations, where you adopt them in some fashion, where you adopt them by consensus. You may decide at the end to adopt them by majority vote. We'll get to that and we'll see. But this is the meeting where that happens. And then I did have a conversation with a couple of you where you wanted to be reassured, and you'll hear this at the end of the meeting. There is going to be another touch point with this task force before the ordinance language goes to council. So you all will be able to see that it reflects, hopefully, what you have instructed in these recommendations. So this isn't the last time that the task force will see each other, but it is the time that you're going to act on the recommendations, hopefully. Chris Carey.
I just want to clarify, we spoke earlier, this is an update and a clarification on a question I asked some time ago about whether or not this committee ends today with this final meeting, or whether or not we will reconvene over the time.
Yes.
We'll have a chance to make the answer was no.
When you asked a couple of months ago. Yeah. And then I think there was a mistake, there was like a miscommunication. And the true answer is, my understanding is yes, this committee will be asked to come together one more time before the language in the ordinance goes to council. So does that make sense in terms of the purpose of this meeting? And will, correct?
Yeah, so there'll be another opportunity for us to close things out, but I think it is important to note that today we are going to be we're going to be asking task force to formally land on decisions on recommendations. And so today is really about finalizing recommendations. We will have another opportunity to facilitate and answer more questions, more discussions if there's some finishing touches, we can do that.
Well, and not, at that point, it won't be the recommendations, it'll be you'll have the recommendations done.
Report,
It will be
yes.
Councilman Hines.
Yeah, I just also want to mention that, Councilmember Perry and I are here as well. We also have to be chair and vice chair of the committee that has enforcement. We're here physically present and we will remember what we talked about today. And if it turns out that you believe it doesn't reconcile, we'll have that extra meeting. But we will be here to be a champion for the ordinance, champion for this committee process. And so because we're here, we want to make sure that what we agree on today is what we vote on council, which should be the ultimate adoption.
Thank you so much for just really clarifying that. Okay, so today, in order to get us to the point where you all feel ready to adopt these recommendations in some fashion, we're going to do a couple of things. So first, we're going to just bring everyone up to speed on what's happened, the conversations that have happened with work groups, with work group members, with all or some of you, with the members of the public, with focus groups, to bring, and you all should have seen at this point the whole set of recommendations as they stand. So hopefully it's, there are no surprises, but we're going to just, the city's going to bring you up to speed on how they got to the form they're in, just so everyone hears the same thing there. And then quick reminder of some of the things that were covered in the briefing and a few things that were covered since. And then we are going to see if you all have final comments, final questions. And then we'll do one. We actually are going to go into small groups because following this process, the city is already starting to plan for a big public outreach and education campaign in 2024. And they're bringing on a consultant, and you'll hear about that today. But one thing we do want to capture from this task force is what should that look like? Like, what should, at the end of that time, what would success look like from this outreach and education campaign? So we're going to get you together for 10, probably 20 minutes in small groups to discuss that. We'll come back together. We'll finally take an action on the recommendations. We'll come to closure on the recommendations, and then we're going to talk about next steps, what happens now. So does anyone have any questions, additions, clarifications on what we're doing today or how? Anyone online? Okay. Yes.
I'm just curious, at that second meeting, once it's been done, is that still an opportunity for a change? Or is it just us reviewing what you done?
Change in terms of the ordinance language. Yeah.
I think it really depends on today. If we don't land on consensus on everything, there might be that opportunity, but I think, it really depends on where we land today. I think there'll be plenty of opportunities between now and that meeting for those conversations to be had. So this isn't the last time we're meeting as a group. It's in that spirit, but we do hope to figure out our recommendations.
I also think from what I heard from Councilman Hines too, like they do want to hear from you all. Yes, this ordinance language, yes, it reflects what we recommended in our recommendations. And if there's a discrepancy, to clarify what that is, and that's going to be relevant to council. So I think they want you on board.
Yes, is there an accounting where we can, I know we're not a committee where we're making motions, organizing that kind of way. Is there a way that we can go and formalize this and point where when a recommendation becomes rules, to have an opportunity where this does have another opportunity to chime in? We're saying we may do it, we might do it, certainly have that buy-in. I'm asking what would the candidates to say about going? This goes back to my.
I think it is going to happen, Chris. It's not a may. Right.
Nothing more than a vote consensus on recommendation.
I mean, I kind of think it's both and all, if the city wants to weigh in. I kind of think also, let me give you my initial response, and then we come back to it at the end when we talk about like what this all looks like, if that's okay with you. But I think it's kind of both and. I think it's a will. You will. It's in a final slide. It's not as a may. It's a will. You all will be reconvened before this goes to before it goes to council in the ordinance language. So that's one clarification. But and at the end of today, we are going to actually formally have you all reported as, yes, we support XYZ recommendations, or no, I'm abstaining, or actually I oppose. So that will be all, documented, and there may be conversations, I think is what Blake's saying too, between now and then, to try to reconcile, to just talk with you all. So I think it is a both and, but yeah, Councilman.
Yeah. Theoretically, yes, there's absolutely wiggle room until the day we take the vote. And we could even suggest amendments on the floor, right? Of the day of the vote. To the point, if we come to consensus today, that's great. And then I would certainly take the direction from the people who are here and the vote and hold the line, right? If there's an item that we want, am I not loud enough?
Yeah.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
We gotta be louder.
Oh, we need you to be even louder.
Right, okay.
Sorry.
If there's something. You didn't make your. If there are things that we vote on, I feel like I'm yelling at you now, so sorry about that.
It's only Chris, it's fine.
If there are things that we disagree on right now, then that's the things that we agree on. I want to say this is, we're editing this and we've decided that this is the right thing to move forward. The things that we disagree on, if we end up disagreeing, then that would be something that would be a bit more fluid. But if we all agree today on an item, I don't see why we would have any reason to make any additional changes. So that's the advantage of having such a large stakeholder group. I don't know if this is not my first time going through the stakeholder process. Probably not your first time, but maybe first time as a council member.
I don't know that I need to add anything. I think the bottom line is that like the council is ultimately the ones that are going to pass the ordinance, right? And our colleagues can amend if they want to do that and everything. But the power of this group coming with recommendations is that it makes it significantly less likely that people will go and face, an amendment or, because of all the thought that went in. And so there's not really, I think what you're wanting is an ability to kind of make this group like more binding. And I don't know that exactly exists, but the opportunity to review the ordinance and say if it meets everyone's expectation will happen and will be taken very seriously by council. Council loves the stakeholder group. Like it gives that, we really do, because it makes our jobs a lot easier and it's the kind of process we would want to have anyway. And that process has instead been done for us very effectively with a lot of that and like really impressively.
And we're on the committee and we want to represent the committee and fight for the decisions that we've made. So if it turns out that someone's not on the committee, they want to propose an amendment, no, sorry. I mean, that should have been part of the process, or at least, so I hope that gives a little more guidance.
The two council members being here does bring a lot of weight to it. So thank you for clarifying that and chiming in.
So, thank you, Anna. All right, so then going to the next slide, with all the multitasking. So just to reiterate, you all have a charter that outlines what you're doing, and we went through it at the very beginning of the process, but just as a reminder, it lays out how this task force is going to reach closure, and that's the part that we do today. And so it says we're going to try to make decisions by consensus, meaning if we have disagreements along the way, which there have been many, we're going to try our best to have work groups and talk with each other and do our best to understand where each other is coming from and see if we can figure it out. And there's been a lot of that, I know. And then at the end, that we have you all lay out three options. So one option is everyone is either yes, thumbs up, I support, or I'm abstaining, but I'm not blocking. I can live with this. Yeah. And so that's the first option. There may be one entity who feels like, you know what, I just need to go on the record as opposing this thing. And maybe it's just one recommendation, or maybe it's the whole set, in which case there is a provision for consensus -1, meaning that entity's interests get reflected in the report, but we still go forward with consensus. And then lastly, you can take a majority vote. If there's more than one entity that feels that the need to oppose, you can still reach closure by taking a majority vote. That will be documented in the report. Council will have that record, and that's how that will work. So at the end of today, this is what we're going to do, one of these options, and we'll see where you all land. which one you want to do. And then we're actually have a chart, like a Google sheet, where we're gonna make a note of, each one of you supported, abstained, or opposed, or whatever each recommendation. So we'll have that as like documentation. So any questions about where we're going today, how we're doing this? Okay, we just wanted to be super clear. And then I think with that, we're gonna dive into basically what's been happening and more context for the package of recommendations as they stand right now. Anyone online have any questions or, okay, good.
I will just ask for folks in the room. I will come to you. So just please raise your hand so I can make sure everyone online has full ability to hear you.
Stand between the audio and the video. I'm not sure. Alrighty, so thanks, Ryan, for opening things up and also for Councilmember Hines and Paraday for those words of comfort about the process moving forward. Really appreciate it. Been a long process, yeah, 6 months or so. Where are we today? Well, we're meeting to finalize our recommendations, hopefully through consensus. We're going to also go through, reiterate some of the public comment. So really what's been happening since July, since we last met, is quite a bit. We've been really busy. We had an online survey. We had over 500 respondents, 1,500 comments. We hosted 20 plus city-led focus groups. Focus groups for individual sectors. We had 3 specific to the Spanish-speaking population. Tried to be as geographically representative and demographically representative as we can with the understanding we have 30 days to do this public comment. But through that process, we learned quite a bit. Verbally, more of a qualitative perspective, but hearing from individual residents, business owners, all of that was assimilated as well as the data we collected from the survey. We also hosted a virtual town hall. Most of y'all attended or have seen that. And what we gathered was there's strong public support for the recommendations. There's, with the exception of one, I think all are close to 80% or above. So I think that demonstrates that we've done good work as a task force, and the public, generally speaking, is supportive. And then we also hosted a pre-briefing, a pre-meeting briefing just last Wednesday. And understanding we had a week, but we're going to go through some of what we said, but next slide. Yeah, so what's happened since our July meeting? Well, in addition, there's the FY24 budget formulation process, and the mayor just released his budget about, I don't know, an hour and a half ago. So it's a little bit hot off the press, but we're going to talk a little bit about the allocation to zero waste funding, specifically what supports will be in place for next year for Waste No More. And I think everyone should be pretty pleased when we get that. So just hold on that, more details to come. We've also been writing the ordinance. So city staff have been working with CAO to start to take the ordinance, the ballot language, and write it so that it's in a legally sufficient way, something that can be implemented, but also reflecting all of the recommendations and the changes and the thoughts and ideas generated. We've also been hiring. So we're hiring two new CASR positions on our team. For the first one, interviews likely to begin very soon. Very excited about that. And then an additional position that we'll be hiring later this fall. So again, I think from CASR's perspective, we've been equally focused on facilitating the task force, getting to a place where we can be successful, but also putting the plans in place so that we can hit the ground running next year very quickly. So we're going to speak to that in a second. So this is all brand new. And I'm really proud of this, and I think I'm going to land here for a moment. We've allocated $500,000 in next fiscal year to implement a citywide education campaign specific to Waste No More. $500,000 just for education, and that doesn't include, let's hear it. This is specific to marketing and advertising. The actual campaign is already in development. So we're moving fast. We're all of the work that we talked about education, we've incorporated that. And we're really putting our money, our mouth where our money is, or our money where our mouth is, in terms of launching that campaign and starting it before the actual implementation date of January 1, 2025. So all of this education work will preclude the actual implementation. So really excited about this campaign, and I'll talk a little bit more about how you all can be involved in that moving forward. But a big deal. This is a big operating budget, something we're really happy about. In addition, we have funds 232,000 towards the actual annual diversion plan platform. So businesses will need to submit recycling plans every year. This is an IT thing that we're going to be building out, and we'll have in place by that implementation date. There's a cost associated with that, so we're working with our IT folks on that. And then in addition, this isn't necessarily specific to Waste No More, but is in the something of note. We have a disposable bag fee fund, and it's been growing as we've been collecting fees, 10 cents for every plastic bag or disposable bag. We're committing $500,000 next year on citywide litter abatement efforts and to study plastic pollution. So this is going to be a new program that we're rolling out, which is again not specific to Waste No More, but I think something that we'll get really excited about when we see that. So yeah, next slide. Or any questions on that? Because I know that's
last bullet point from the 500,000 that abatement. Sorry, I was supposed to. On that last bullet point, 500,000, is that for abatement and the study, or just the study?
It's just the beginning of an investment that we'll be making over a longer period of time. And really the goal is to help to clean up pockets of the city that are really struggling with the litter, but simultaneously studying that can inform future decision-making policies on that. So yeah, we'll have a lot more to speak on this new program soon. Yeah. Thanks, Peggy. Okay, so we're going to just revisit quickly the results of the survey. Again, this was covered in the briefing, but there was need a reminder. And we had 1,500 total comments. We have the demographics there on the right side of the screen. 61% identified women, 27% identified men, 12% identified as non-binary and other. And important to note, 96% of respondents live and or work in Denver. Yes, Chris.
Can you break down just respondents who live in Denver? I get the relevant people who work here. At the end of the day, it's the will of the voter. That's what we're empowered by. And though workers will be impacted by that will of the voters, they don't necessarily get a say in how we implement our policy.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the way we both allowed it for select all that apply. And so
There was an option that says live and work in Denver, and there was I live in Denver, I work in Denver. So there were also some options. Thank you, Donna.
We also collected some survey results on a paper form. So there were many people who, checked multiple boxes. So it would be kind of difficult. We could absolutely send that to you afterwards if you want to see just those who are Denver residents.
We're curious if we go forward and do these polls, but again, with the will of voter being motivation, I'm really curious to see where residents.
yeah, I think we can certainly include that in the report if we want to be more specific to just residents. I think the intent of allowing that work in this, because this does affect business owners too, and understanding that some folks might not live in Denver, but they might own a business here and be impacted. So, but it's a valid point.
There are motivations or charter calls to the voter, not necessarily.
Ian, go ahead.
Well, first of all, I want to echo what Chris Chiari says, which I hadn't really thought of, but the will of people who don't live in Denver, we know the will of the voters and the timeline we're on. Outside of that, this is really to the staff and of course the council members and new council member Sarah Parody, what we're seeing here with 1% of respondents Black, 1% from the API, it's reflected in the lack of diversity in our green businesses. This is across agencies. I held up when I was with Denver INC, the Blueprint Denver Task Force for 6 months because 2% of the respondents were Black. This is a consistent failure across agencies by our government in Denver to engage these two populations in particular. Now, the Latino numbers are lower, but you did make the effort with a focus group, and I want to acknowledge that. I think we need to be more thoughtful going forward, not just with this agency, and that's why I'm really speaking directly to the council members here, that we got to shore this up. We have best practices in community engagement at the state level. We talked about them. We have we can have good practices here. I guess I was really just disheartened to see that, and I think that was true when we were selecting members for this task force as well. We only ended up one Black person on here. It's not reflective of our community. We had to do more, and so I just wanted to take a moment to really speak to that, because this ballot issue was written and carried by people of color, and then to see that decisions about making changes of it not reflective of those communities, this is a tough pill to swallow.
Yeah, Ian, thank you for bringing that up. And I was actually going to ask if staff could read the breakdown on the right, because it's a little hard in the back to see the breakdown, but I think everyone has probably seen these numbers, but it might be good to emphasize because it is pretty glaring.
Yeah, so just for those in the room, 67% identify as white or Hispanic, 15% prefer not to answer. That could skew results too in a way, but 12% Hispanic or Latino, 4% biracial and multiracial, 1% Black or African American, and 1% East or Southeast Asian.
So I don't know if anyone has any other comments or thoughts about it, but it certainly is. I mean, I think the numbers say it, and Ian said it.
Yeah, I think, Ian, we echo that we're disappointed by these results, and I think we're definitely focused on improving this moving forward. And it's always difficult doing such a short public comment period, but yeah, we're not thrilled with these results either. We'd like to see more representation, and hopefully we can improve on that moving forward. Next slide.
Like that small point again. So the only other reason I would ask if break out didn't work is that it would give us a chance to see where residents of the city stand on policy like this, especially once we're moving into final recommendations and rules, and where businesses might be, because it could show an education disconnect or a point of engagement that could help, win businesses over if they weren't necessarily in line with residents.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we can incorporate all of those things into the report. Again, just we had staff maybe 8 days to put the data together, and there's a lot, and we've talked about doing another deep dive and just kind of review. So I think we can, if that would be helpful, break it out in a different way in the report to say, here's how business, or here's how the individual groups felt, not just an aggregate. So
great.
So again, strong support across the board. One recommendation in particular, permanent events phasing. There was more of a wider distribution in terms of the 4 options we presented. It's important to note that is the only recommendation that had options to choose from. So that might be why it was lower than some of the others. But I think we're pretty happy with the strong support here. And we're going to talk a little bit more in a second about what we did on 3 recommendations. But first, again, some common themes, a lot of comments about timing. Generally, the frustration is that we should be moving faster and that our goals aren't aggressive enough. On the infrastructure piece, there's concern that there isn't enough processing capacity, maybe a sense that there aren't going to be enough haulers to support things once we get going, lack of physical space for containers, compliance education enforcement, a very popular topic, concerns about who's required to comply, how will we implement and enforce requirements as a city government, And then whether there'll be sufficient education to manage contamination, and how to really incentivize that behavior change. So again, just want to point out, for folks in the room, there's 477, so almost a third of comments had to do with education and enforcement, and I think that really speaks to the focus of this task force on that topic. And it also costs. So there's concerns about obviously increased financial costs. Will there be sufficient incentives and support? And whether these new requirements will be passed, the cost will be passed on the line, with rent increases being kind of the main concern. Next slide, please. So again, we've been really busy. It's been a short cycle, very fast and furious. Since that briefing, we have, or since the public comment period, we have hosted discussions on the front of house organics topic. We've hosted discussions on special events. And we shored things up. Hopefully we've got some more, we added some things in. In addition, we did a recap and pre-meeting briefing, which we talked about. We provided you all with an opportunity to submit final comments via email. We did a temperature check poll, which you all probably have seen in the last few days. Again, thank you all for those who completed that. And we've been busy doing, again, ordinance drafting and hiring, again, just to put us in a position to get this thing going.
Well, and I think what you're about to hear next, I believe, is some of the tweaks that have been made in response to some of those discussions over the past week or 2 weeks. So for those of you who've been part of this discussion, it'd be great to have you thinking about, what Blake's about to share, and then we'll take a moment and hear comments, questions, other input. Okay.
That's right. Yeah, and before we get into this, I just want to say that, we have a difficult task, which is taking the feedback from task force members, weighing that against the public response, weighing against the city's perspective of how can we implement these things, the technical challenges in place. We hope that we're in a good place. I think we are. I hope you all feel that. Again, it's very difficult to perfection's unattainable. But hopefully everyone feels like we are close. And I think the public support for these speaks to that. So yeah, we'll talk through what specific changes we've made.
And can I say one more thing, which is a couple of you have asked, just to clarify, I think what the city's role in all of this has been to try to capture what you all have been asking for as a task force, knowing that you have had differences of opinion, and hosting these conversations to try to see if you all can come to some compromise or consensus amongst yourselves as experts in these different sectors, and then coming up with language that also is responsive to some of the public input as digested by your work groups. So I think you should see the city as sort of doing this legwork and then presenting it to you all to see how does this land for you. And that was sort of what the temperature check poll was, how is this landing for you? But feel free, at this point, it's not like the city is telling you what the recommendations are going to be. I think the city has been trying to pull these things together for your benefit and to present to you, to weigh in how you all want.
These are you as a task force's recommendations. They're not the city's recommendations, they're yours. And so it's important to know that and own that. And yeah, we're going to try to do our best in terms of appeasing everybody's wishes and concerns. So 6 of the 13 recommendations have been updated since we last met in July. Again, a lot of that has to do with the survey results. We've heard in response from these individual discussions, again, on front of house organics being one, permanent events being another. But there's been tons of emails too. I mean, for all of you who've been sending us ideas, thank you. We've been trying to incorporate it all and make sure that, again, if a new idea is created, does it conflict with an existing recommendation and an existing idea? So we're trying to find that balance. But again, these are being offered to you all for your opinion, your approval. And so education best practices and supports, definitions, annual recycling plans, create financial supports and incentives, policies that support solid waste infrastructure, and compliance timeline for permanent events have all been updated. The others have not been touched. So if you go into the recommendation, documents, you'll see the date of when it was last edited. That'll give you also an indication of when they've been updated and what's been done with them. Oh, please.
So we've been, Brian, I'll talk about, we've been going back and forth on a potential loophole with the food trucks and the facilities that they serve not being required. Is any of that listed in the updates of recommendations? Thank you.
Yes, we have. So, what Brian's speaking to is some individual concerns that have been put forward here at the end. I'm calling these sort of like the finishing touches. Right? We're at the end. We're figuring out little minutia, important minutia, right? And that's not a don't take that word another way, but we're really at that point. I think that speaks to the success that we're at. But yeah, we're going to talk about that, Brian.
And I'm glad you brought it up, because I think if you could differentiate, for people who saw the briefing, hopefully all of you, and looked at have looked at the current ballot recommendations as of your email a couple days ago, maybe differentiate any that have been updated since, which I think is going to.
Yes, yeah, there have been some since the pre-meeting briefing, which we held last week. There have been some additional changes. We're going to talk about those as well. One of those is included. So again, this is what we presented in the pre-meeting briefing last week. So there's been a lot of discussion on just making sure, can we ensure success in the organic stream? Really open meetings that we had quite a few of you participate. I won't go through all of these for the interest of time again, but I just want to speak to the level that we address this issue. So on education, a lot more language has been added to the education recommendation to have a stronger emphasis on ensuring success in the organic stream, tackling the issue of contamination. We've also touched on definitions. So access to being kind of a priority concern. And also coming up with ways that we can create a little bit more flexibility to achieve access. Both in rules and regs and also in the annual recycling plans. Submissions. We've added language to make sure that that platform is designed in a way where it's not just a checking of the box, like a yes or no, but there are options. There's flexibility built in so that if a business doesn't want to offer front of house, they don't have to, but they will need to demonstrate how they're providing access in another way. And so I think, we're trying to bake in a lot of flexibility for businesses to comply, but also stay consistent with the intent of voters. Next slide. So again, more on organics is a hot topic. We expanded a lot on financial support incentives. Ideas of more grant programs, promoting reuse and food donation on the front end, provision for zero interest loans for businesses, and more partnerships and leverage opportunities there. On the emphasis, yes, please.
Go back a slide. Yeah.
Don't be sorry.
Can you explain promote single-use plastic reduction?
Yes, I want to know what, like, if we're reducing, I'll just be specific, if we're reducing single plastic reduction, are we replacing it with another single-use product?
No, we wouldn't be. So incorporated in education and outreach that we'll be doing, we'll always speak to waste reduction. And the best way to reduce single use is to provide reusable options. We're going to be rolling out more reuse programs in time. But no, the idea is not, instead of plastic, it's bamboo or it's, a compostable plastic or something other. Really encouraging businesses to not to go reuse, but have reusables and reduce their waste stream. And by doing so, you end up with less of those problematic things in the stream.
Go ahead, Van.
Is there a thanks for explaining this. Is there a PDF version of that's in the same format of the other recommendations that explains this slide in the same format as the other recommendations?
You mean that's in the same format as the evaluation rubrics for each of those 14 recommendations?
Yes, yeah, I guess I'm a little bit unclear on, like, I think this is great. Like, I love more clearly defined access in the ordinance and or rules and regulations, et cetera. But I just was, yeah, I'm just unclear on how, like, are we voting on this slide later, or is there a, yeah, just a little unclear.
Great question, Van.
Yeah, thanks, Van. So all of this language has been incorporated to the recommendation. So when we say promote single-use plastic reduction, that literal line has been added to the education best practices recommendation. So, and those are all available online to see. And we'll make sure to maybe at the break send that link out just for folks to have that accessible.
And to remind people where that is in the email. So you may remember you got an email from Blake, I think last Friday, with a whole list of the recommendations, including all the new ones. And so when it's, I assume like this is right where it says education, if you look at the education best practices, it's in that recommendation. If you look at definitions on the slide that's up right now, it's in the definitional recommendation. So.
And I think, you know, what we're hearing today is that these recommendations are very important for us to kind of land on consensus or do the best that we can. The report that goes to Councilmember Hines and Paraday and their peers, the report can be expanded. It can have more detail, and that would be the opportunity that we're talking about of if we need to call certain things out or emphasize them stronger, we can do so in that report.
Van, does that answer your question? Oh, good. Okay, good.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think this is great.
I think we're on the next slide.
And so likewise on this, I assume those 3 recommendations correspond to what's in bold.
Yes.
Yes. So again, all of this language that we presented to you, we've incorporated into the actual recommendation rubric forms. Those are those, you know, white and blue tabulated documents that you guys have probably seen once upon a time, or maybe recently. All of this has been added for your approval, for your consideration. And so, yeah, a lot was done on financial supports and incentives, on the infrastructure piece as well. So again, on the just creating more recycling options, that was something that we identified maybe to be improved on. And then on the technical assistance, for us to actually study contamination in the stream, alongside generation, participation, all of those things, so that we can routinely iterate and identify where the pain points are in the gaps. And then for that data to be collected to be used to continuously inform education. So this is a lot more about implementation as opposed to the rules and requirements, but something that you all put forward is really important. Obviously, the way we implement this will be, a huge part. Yes, Chris.
Can you share which working group brought that forward as a priority that you're identifying now and saying that you heard such a loud outcry for that?
Yeah, so we had an organics working group that met, and then a group of task force members, I think that were really, that represent the recycling community in one way or the other, or had strong opinions. We held a couple of sessions, and these were some of the ideas that were generated. And then in addition, there were a lot of side conversations about via email of suggestive ideas from the ballot sponsors, from individual stakeholders.
And just to reiterate, Chris, so you probably remember getting an email from me 2 weeks ago or something, and the organics group had met twice, I think, and people were invited, all of you were invited to join. And then there was a request to meet again. So then I sent out another reminder for anyone to join. A bunch of non-working group members joined as well. The task force. So it was,
yeah, and Chris also could support a lot of this conversation with 2 words.
Wait, Clinton, sorry.
I don't talk loud. So I was just saying to Chris also, that supported a lot of this conversation were the 2 tours, not only at Dad's waste management facility, but also at A1's facility. And a lot of people attended those to get up and personal experience of why this is so important.
And again, the stakeholder or the public comment process also. I mean, we saw how many comments were on education and the topic of contamination was brought up too, quite a bit. So, again, that's the difficult task that we had of balancing all of that, but, yeah, thanks, Clint, for expanding on. That's fine. Be admitted to.
Oh, reconnect. That's why. It'll reconnect.
No one panic. No one panic.
Fortunately, I memorized. It's nice TV.
Give us just a moment here.
Okay. For those online, where we just had our monitor go down, so just give us a one moment.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
We do have some physical copies of the deck as well, if folks would want a copy.
If you all didn't hear, did you all hear what Brian said? Yeah, if you want to get out your individual laptops, it might help. Anyone want a physical copy? Oh, thanks, Becky. Here, I can bring one.
And in addition, while we're waiting, we do have physical copies of all of the recommendation rubrics.
Oh.
So again, just for those that really might want to dig into it in here in person, and for those online, I will make sure that the link is added to the chat, so you can access that. But
maybe we just go forth and ask people to, are people mostly able to, some people don't have laptops. While we're doing this, would anyone like, and Clinton, Brian, would any of you like a packet of the evaluation of each of the recommendations? Yeah, I think this is what they, oh, look at.
imaging all of
Marked up. Oh.
All right, anyone else want a packet? Yes, you. It's really long.
Are we back yet? There we are. We're back.
I think the monitor just maybe something like
you know what, I think we can actually start talking about this. We might be more discussion.
Sure. So yep, for folks online, you're gonna be able to see the
Oh, are you still sharing this?
No.
okay, just one moment, everybody. Sorry for the delay.
I'll put a slide on it. Right after the organic stream. Yeah.
Awesome. All right, we're back.
We'll take another break at some point soon, but people may need to confer with each other and catch up. So we'll do that too.
Yep. So in addition to addressing front of house organics as a major issue, we also, we put forward 4 options to the public for permanent events for that implementation timeline. And then based on all of the feedback we received from the survey, the focus groups, we as city staff were recommending option 4, which did come in at 41% approval, which was the most of the 4 options put forward. And so again, that was the city staff's proposal based on the feedback. And again, this was a very discreet kind of change to the recommendation, just to say, yep, it's all events, no phasing, and for events that comply within 24 months from the adoption of rules, but no later than January 1, 2026.
And just a reminder, and it looks like someone has a question too or comment.
Ian has his hand.
You may remember in July, at your meeting in July, this was one of the questions that we did where we didn't reach closure in terms of the recommendations going out to public comment. So we left that meeting saying, okay, we're going to give a range of possibilities and just put it out for public comment. We'll come back to this at the September meeting.
Ian,
So,
do you want to go ahead?
Ian.
Yeah, this is probably one of the recommendations I think the proponents, as we've talked about it, have the most challenge with, as a delay created here. I would like to propose that we move this to January 2025, January 1, 2025. I understand people have already pulled permits for next year. I think that it's reasonable that events should be able to go in 2025. And I think when we look at the surveying, it's been clear both from the community, they didn't want delay. The voters voted for it knowing that this is one of them that would go quickly. And I think, we've compromised on some of the other timelines, understanding about implementation, and having come work from this space. I think we're really uncomfortable with this recommendation out of the city. And I would very much like support from others to say, hey, there's no reason why we can't begin doing the education out of special events and requiring this in 2025.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Could everyone hear, and before we open it up for discussion, and Chris, I see your hand up, I'm wondering, because I feel like you all haven't heard about the events discussion since your July meeting, and it might be helpful, and I don't know, Rose, I know you all have convened 1 or 2 focus group or work group meetings. Maybe you could bring everyone up to speed on what the discussion has been to get to this point, and then we can go back to Ian's comment and just sort of see if others want to chime in.
Sure. So hopefully I'm going to face this because that's where the most challenge is hearing. So just to remind everybody, in our July meeting, we could not come to consensus on what the recommendations should be. And that is how we came up with the options. So all of the options that were put forth were not recommendations from the city. They were recommendations put forth by the task force. So this recommendation that got the most support during public engagement was put forth by Brian Loma at the end of our July meeting. We did do a decent amount of public engagement, both for the residents and the voters on the wider ordinance initiative, as well as direct engagement for permitted event holders. And so those were with the 4 options that the task force put forth. So I just wanted to clarify that. The recommendation landing on option 4 is based on the public engagement. It's not a recommendation that the city put forth.
Okay, so a little clarification. And then in terms of you had 1 or 2 special events meetings?
Yep.
And
So
can you just-
Office of Special Events hosted a public engagement session. We sent out the invites to all of the permittees in both our system and the parks system to engage in that. We also recorded it, put it on our website. We also then sent a follow-up survey to all of our permittees. And then Renee Ortiz, who is one of the seats on the task force, hosted another follow-up discussion with event planners and invited different task force members, particularly the ones that were most vocal about how the special event recommendation was going to land.
Okay. And do you want to say anything else about like what came out of those conversations, just for people who weren't there?
Ultimately, we were deliberating about how to incorporate the feedback, and that is how we got to option 4 here. Is we saw from the voters they wanted to move faster. The original proposed timeline that was the recommendation put forth was by 2027. So we've shortened that to 2026. The event industry we had tried to acknowledge the unique constraints that they had brought up in this group about having night and weekend pickups and needing to return public space back to the public in a constrained timeline. And so this was the compromise. It got the most support from the, like I said, the event planners as well as the residents. So that's why we took that feedback that we got throughout the month, and based on the input we got, I think this should be the revised recommendation, but that's for the task force to discuss.
Cool. Thank you so much. Because, okay, so just having, these are all like totally legitimate, understandable, right? Balancing things to trade-offs and things to balance. I'm just wondering, for you all as task force members, some of you have been privy to all this, to these discussions, but are there any just impressions? Yeah, Chris.
So, just so I clarify, to clarify this, I want to hold an event in Civic Center Park. I will be responsible to bring in an independent outside trash service, ultimately to haul away any trash created by my event. Meaning that for every event, every organizer, the city has to come in and make sure we have enforcement of our standard. Is there any motivation on the city side, since we know basically how many events we have in a year, to basically put resources or infrastructure in place that could be rolled out? You know, it's a 5,000 person event, you know what you need. It's a 200,000 person event, you know what you need. But we have the resources, at least from the trucks and containers, then we can come in. It's a certain size. We have this number of recycling bins, this number of composting bins. Now all we need is green teams to watch them to protect the waste stream. But if we as a city are going to set a standard and an expectation, couldn't we step in a position of offering, since it is our parks in our city through a permitted process, couldn't we find a way to monetize this to the benefit of our goals here with diversion and do it sooner? Because we're not waiting for all of these independent operators and all these independent event promoters and producers to come up with hopefully best practices eventually, but a few mistakes along the way.
Before, and Rose, I don't know if you want to respond or if there's anyone from the city who can respond to that or has thoughts about it, but one, just, I guess, point of order as your facilitator. This, keep in mind, these discussions I know have been going on for many months. You've had many work groups, and I think it's important to make space. This is one of the most tricky issues. That's clear in the July meeting. So we're going to take some time right now to talk about it, but we're not going to take too, like, I don't think we can take too much time because we're at the end. And these are things I know that have come up over and over and again. So rather than opening up a new conversation, I'm wondering if this is more, we can talk about sort of finishing touches. Is there a way to thread the needle in light of Ian's proposal, in light of all the work that's going on? And so in that spirit, is there someone who wants to respond to Chris's question?
Yeah, just really quickly, and I'll defer to Rose for, I think what you're talking about, Chris, is for events that are taking place in Civic Center Park or in, you know, public property, right? You know, I think there's a lot that we can do to make sure that the proper receptacles are in place in those locations, like year round. That's something that we can facilitate. In addition, we do plan, and we're going to talk a little bit about this, and I guess this would be regardless of where the task force lands in terms of their recommendation. But our goal is to promote zero waste events right away. And so for the early adopters out there, to make sure that they have what they need to do what they can. So I think it's more about, I think the decision point for the task force is more about when do we want these requirements to go in place, not when these activities can actually begin. Because there's nothing to say that they can't begin now.
So we can recommend the recommendation of January 1st, 2025.
If that's something that
I'd like a motion to change that to January 1st, 2025.
Well, we're not really doing official motions, but that I think is what Ian's proposing. It sounds like you're supportive, but
Renee does have her hand raised online, so Renee, you can go ahead.
Yeah, and Renee, and again, we're not, well, anyway, yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you. I'll just be really quick. I am in favor of the implementation plan that is on screen right now, option 4, with the January 1st, 2026 deadline. And to echo, Blake was saying exactly what I was raising my hand to say, in that that doesn't mean, certainly doesn't mean that events are going to start later. It's merely the way that I'm interpreting it, and the way that my peers are interpreting it, is that that's our deadline for compliance and not a start date. There's already a ton of work that is going on this. And so while I appreciate the urgency and agree with the urgency, from my vantage point, I am weighing that with the greenwashing that I have seen in special events, not across the board, but there's certainly a percentage of event organizers that will comply by putting out access. And then they will take those bins and everything will go in the trash, or, really bad contamination for recycling and compost. So I want that. I want people to, have that opportunity to go into it wanting to do it, instead of knee-jerk reacting to this in a way that actually undoes the end goal. So those are my quick thoughts on it, and I will pass the torch.
Thank you, Renee. And I see Stephen's hand, and also I'm curious if, like, in a minute you could talk about, I think I saw some communication about how ideas for incentivizing the early adoption in this space, maybe after Stephen. Do you want to? Okay.
If you just go to the next. So thank you, Renee. And I know there's some other hands. This maybe will, let's go to the next slide just for a moment. And Ian's, I know your hand's raised. Actually, let's give Ian a chance. I think we're a little bit further along.
Okay, so.
Or Stephen, go ahead.
Yeah.
We call on you first.
So we're going to come back to.
Yeah, we're in a couple of slides. We're going to talk about in response to these last minute concerns.
Okay.
Yes, stay here for a moment. So Stephen, please, and then we'll go to Ian.
I want 2 points I think are important. Number one is that I think sometimes, as we've learned over the course of time, a lot of time the voters don't understand what it takes to do implementation with some of these things, right? And we've seen, and so hearts are always in the right place, but it's up to us, I think, to make sure that the implementation can be done effectively so that we end up with the end results that we really want. And I think that was the point that was just made, is, not keeping people and encouraging people to start at their events doing it now. But for some, it's going to be harder implementation than others. And so in order to ensure that we get the end result that we want and don't end up with, something that's kind of gone awry at that point. So I just think that we need to keep in mind who the professionals are and what their recommendation is, just my kind of point on there. And so I think when you look at both of those things, it's like listening to the professionals that do this for a living and understanding the challenges of that. And number two, making sure that we don't make it so complicated that we end up not getting the end result that we want, right? We talk about people not knowing, not knowing what to throw away in a plastic when they're recycling plastic or whatever. So again, keep it simple.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sorry.
No, you're good. Ian, go ahead.
I don't think there's too much about this exact moving this up a year that speaks to anything you just said about becoming more complicated. There have been events for more than a decade that have been following along and building best practices to create this. The vendors and producers have experience working on events that have delivered on this. And this is about giving them an entire year, not on the permits this year, even though that's what have happened and we not ended up in this task force, to get in line with best practices, to work with companies like, for example, Scraps, which has been doing this for years, to implement this appropriately. And Renee, I agree with you that greenwashing takes place, but I don't think delaying the people who are going to greenwash, they're going to be the people who are going to wait till the end anyways and then still try to greenwash. So I don't think that argument like lands for me. But I do understand that we want to get it right. I do want to support early adopters. I do want the government to do their part on education, and I want special events to do that. I think this 1 year difference allows everybody to get ahead on their permits. We filed for this in 2022 or in 2020. I think people have had a long time to see it coming.
Okay, thanks.
Van you go ahead.
Yeah, I'll be super quick. I will also say on behalf of voters who and the petitioners that I don't see how another year will make a difference. And I think that the voters really want to see change now. The ordinance passed in November last year, and zero waste events have known that they needed to start to comply with this. And so I think that just like front of house composting, it's going to be, a lot of mistakes are going to be made. There's going to be greenwashing. There's going to be some rough stuff at some, but at some point we got to jump in. And I think that if we do it in the beginning of 2025, that's still like 15 months from now. And that still seems like just plenty of time. But that's what I'll say. I think that, yeah.
Okay. No, thank you, Van. Appreciate it. And so I don't see other hands up, but I'm gonna just like summarize.
Christy, go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, hi. I'm trying to recall exactly how it was phrased in the survey. But similar to those who have just spoken before, this is one of those recommendations where I feel like I will not oppose it, but I'm not psyched about it for exactly the reasons that Ian and Van and others have expressed. More time is just kind of more foot dragging, and we have so many wonderful examples. And I'll just reiterate what I've said in multiple meetings. So many wonderful examples, both working with and our organization and other organizations of events of all types and sizes all over the Denver Metro, who have figured out how to implement this financially, operationally, and sustainably. So yeah, I'm just going to echo what they said.
Thanks, Christy, and also for just bringing up the point about kind of how you were thinking about this in the poll. And so here's one possibility. You all, again, this was the toughest nut to crack at the July meeting, and it makes sense that it's coming up now. One possibility that we could do is we could say, okay, let's put special events on its own kind of voting track with this group. And again, I'm just putting this out there as a possibility to be able to keep going, but note the complicated nature of this and the sort of trade-offs. And I'm going to go to Brian because he might have a thought about this. But so one possibility could be have all of you look at the possibility of a January 2025 deadline or a January 2026 deadline for special events. And is there one of them which one would you support, or would you abstain from both because you don't really care? And we could just see where you all land to be able to keep moving. But most importantly, noting in the report, here's the pros, here's the cons. Council, here's where we landed. I see Brian's hand up, Chris's hand up, and Clinton's hand up, and Rose's hand up. So I'm curious about people's thoughts about that. Chris, and then maybe Rose.
So I'd like to apply within 24 months. There was a recommendation to come from this group that seemed to be well received or supported about an earlier compliance date, but use non-compliance then as a point of engagement to educate, not a point of engagement to penalize, so that we can implement sooner, so that the city gets ready sooner and then becomes a resource to events. So again, we can get to this desire for sooner implementation, but then use it as a point of getting to the end goal, not again as this deadline of then enforcement.
So I think what I'm hearing is, what if you have the January 2025 deadline, but instead of punitive and enforcement, there's a trigger at 2025
Substantive engagement.
that says, guess what? This is enforced.
Get penalized because you were engaged this time. There's more need for that enforcement then.
Okay, Rose, I'm gonna go to you and then Brian and then Clinton, and feel free to weigh in on that because of course Rose is the person who would then be, her office would be implementing this. So you're a little our reality check.
Well, I have my hand first raised because I wanted to respond accurately to Chris. He was asking why the city doesn't, or can the city service events in public space? And we did explore that option right now. Is there anyone from Dottie on the call? Because they might know better. Okay, then I'm gonna paraphrase just from a talking point that I have because we did go down that path. Is that the city currently is prohibited by state law from providing waste hauling to other entities. So that was a roadblock we incurred when we were, because that was initially a thought that we had to simplify things.
It would be trash service with city property or public land. That's why that's where maybe it's a little ambiguous. That state law.
It's city, we can service city sponsored events, but not private events for it's competition with the private sector.
So there's that. That's just one thing I wanted to reply to earlier. And then regarding what Chris is proposing, I just have to think about how that it could be written into rule, which is part of the reason why we were proposing that 26, so that we could do exactly that, but it's easier to write into ordinance that way than to write a comply by date and then somehow write in there that you get to not comply. You know what I mean? Like that, it's just a little more complicated, which is part of why I was supportive of the 26 recommendation, because what standard practice in our office for rolling out regulations for events when there's new regulations is to get it in front of the event organizers for a year. Many of these events have they're mostly nonprofits and their budgets are set the year prior. So what we do is we put it in front of them, but we do not enforce it for the first year. So we have a template plan that includes, you know, can you source recycling? Can you source composting? If not, why not? So that we're getting like that feedback from them. So it's just it's more enforceable the way it's written now than it would be the other way is all.
Sometimes this though is the process of satisfying the concerns. Right. And my ask is if we can get to a point that creates more urgency, I think that would go a long way as a concession to some of the concerns with implementation. And this seems to be the one that has the least support at 41% and the most still uncertainty about the best path forward.
And it sounds to me like there needs to be a little time to figure out a creative way. But
well, and then here's what I think, and Megan from my office is here. She's been working on this with us, is what we can do. And I have to talk to my city attorney, so please don't hold me to this, but you might be able to help. I think we can write it such that plans are required starting in 24, honestly, as early as 24, that we have these organizers fill out these templates in our application, but then enforcing that access piece that's part of this ordinance. So I'm not sure if that would help with the concerns of getting this, having the plan be part of the requirement, but then as far as the access to the 3 stream being written in ordinance for either 25 or 26. Regardless, we're still rolling out the need for event organizers to submit a plan in 24. So
and that might not even require an ordinance change. I don't know.
Right, it's just an application
not a city for me, but I mean, like very many ordinances in the city are written that, any application for or process needs to be done on forms as provided by that organization's director. And so that's just a programmatic change that might not even need to go in ordinance that, like Rose said, could, they could decide to do that. I mean, that's something we'll explore with the city. But
okay, so thank you all for that, for the creative thinking. And Brian and Clinton, I know you all wanted to wait. Brian, not Ryan, sorry. And I have folks online, but yeah, go ahead.
Rose, thank you for the reminder that I'm the one who called for an earlier date at the last gathering, because I forgot about that. And I really do appreciate that even as we're bickering about 26 being too far out, that we were at 27. So I'm highly grateful for that reminder. And I did get an email earlier today about the possibility of language that would require trial runs in 25 as a potential to appease the concerns. I really remember as we were going through this ballot measure and reaching out to people, how we felt as petitioners that the public events were going to be the training module for all the other places, including all the people who live in apartments, right? And so I think that this is really why, for some of us, this is such a huge sticking point, because the public event gets people to see the standardization that they're going to experience at every other location. So I just wanted to acknowledge that this is a very tough thing, and I have been beating on this drum for a long time. Even in talking with businesses and the events, that places that we're doing it, great examples of how it's working easily, but I'm already feeling special events that I'm affiliated with having some fight back about not wanting to get on board. And so I really feel that we've all agreed that the longer we delay it, getting it right is going to take longer out there. And so however we can come to a place where we're pushing the visible aspects of it in public as early as possible. But I do appreciate the reminder that the original suggestion was 27, and we came backwards a year on that.
Thank you, Brian. And so it's sounding to me like Ian does have that you all are the creative thinking and juices maybe getting you all somewhere, but Clinton, you have your hand up, and then I think we'll go to Ian online. You're good?
I just wanted one clarifying point. Did you say that it's here to get your phone?
No.
2024, you already applied for something?
Yeah, actually, so permitting opens up on November, and actually for historic events, that's happening currently for next year. So it is the year before, and also most of our public events, and again, reminding everyone, public events is outdoor in public space. It's not at a venue, it's not at Cruise Field, it's not at Red Rocks, it is literally in the street or in a park. And they are mostly nonprofits, and they set their budget a year in advance. So it's twofold. One, pulling your preliminary permit that far in advance, but also for their budgets, which often are very small margins. So then,
yeah, in 1 year, the budget, why not? Why do you want the second year?
I didn't put this recommendation forward. This is what came. Well, out of the 4 recommendations, this is the one that got the most support for public feedback. So I was putting that forth as recommending that this be our new recommendation, because that's the one that got the most support.
It's also, of the 4 recommendations, the one that is fastest too, in terms of, because the others had tiers and multiple years of phasing. So again, just for that context.
Yeah, Marguerite, go ahead.
Yeah, so the option 4 of no phasing is what the public comment was on. Was the public comment also relating to January 1st, 2026?
Yes, that exactly. Well, that was what was proposed.
But there was no, no phasing in January 2025 as an option for the public.
There were 4 options. The first was all events regardless of size, January 1 within 24 months. There was large events first, and then that phasing similar to how we have for residential and non-residential. And then, so there were a timeline that was quicker, a timeline that was slower for large events first, and then another event where it was small events first and moving forward. So,
But no option for January 1, 2025.
Right. So I'm just saying, in combination with the other comments that we're pushing for more urgency, would that have been a more popular option if there was an option 5? This is my question and point.
Rhetorical and understandable question.
Yeah. And
so many concerns involved.
Yeah.
So many meetings.
Yeah, for sure. Ian.
Ian, online.
Is there somebody else?
Can you hear me? My turn?
Yes.
Please go ahead.
So I just, I want to be clear that a lot more, thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of people voted for a timeline that was before this. And a small segment of people voted for options we put in front of them that still didn't meet what the voters had asked for. I want to echo what Brian said, which is we collected a lot of these signatures at events that were doing just this, doing the right thing, and it's a place that speaks to people. I want to reiterate that I think we've compromised a lot when it comes to C&D, when it comes to apartments. This is one we feel very strongly about. And if I heard it right just now, special events is already committing to spending 2024 as an opportunity to softly ask people to begin thinking about this process. So it seems like everything's aligned for 2025 from my perspective, from a bureaucratic perspective, from the voters who overwhelmingly supported a timeline that was faster than the ones that are coming out of this task force in general across the board. So again, I don't want to belabor this to death. I think 2025 is a reasonable compromise. We've made concessions on the petitioners' ends. I hope you guys can support us on ours.
Well, and Ian, it's hard because you're not in the room, but I feel like a lot of what you're saying, people are echoing parts of it. So I don't hear any opposition to like the components. And we just haven't. I don't know where people stand on the timeline yet, but I do see Councilman Time. Can't wait, Chris. Hold up. Sorry.
Well, I was gonna bring back, you offered a straw poll, and I think I'd like to see that.
So
We can do that.
yeah, so here are two options. One is what Councilman Hines said about just having a straw poll where we basically give you all, if you were to choose between the 2025, 2026 deadline, where would you stand? And one of the things I will just emphasize is what I'm hearing from all of you is that there is no reason, like there are all kinds of ways to create urgency around this, and that special events, I don't hear any opposition for the idea that special events is a really important public facing space to roll out Waste No More and has lots of co-benefits. So I'm seeing, I think that is implicit in whether it's 2025 or 2026 if you're doing this straw poll. So that's the suggestion on the table, unless there's somebody who, would prefer going a different route. But other than that, I'm going to just suggest that we do that over the break. And we will provide a mechanism for you all to do that. And it will allow us, I think, to go forward in terms of, are there enough people that are kind of persuadable on the 2025 thing and willing to just go with it? Do we need to do a majority vote on that particular issue? And we can carve it out, do a majority vote on that, and then have everything else considered together. So I think it'll give us some input. Any concerns or alternative suggestions? Christy, I see, is there a note from Christy?
It's about education for special events. So
I think maybe what we should assume is that there is no opposition to this idea that their early adopters for events should be incentivized. I think we're going to talk, that there should be tons of education, that special events are a really important way to educate people, and et cetera. Like that seems to me to be urgency around this seems to be universally felt. Okay. Okay, is that everyone good with that doing that on the break? Okay. Final comments on the special events deliberation before we do that. Yeah. Oh wait, hold up. Here comes the mic. You're very quiet.
Just to elaborate on the urgency of the education for special events has to focus on the best management practices that have been proven to work.
So there are best management practices in those meetings.
They're there. They're there. But
that needs to be part of the campaign. Yeah.
Absolutely. Stephen, I'm just going to say back to the original comment that I made earlier. I am, even with this, I'm deferring to the professionals in the room from the event perspective that if they feel like that as an industry, it's doable. I don't have skin in that game personally. My organization doesn't. And so I just am going to put that out there. And so I just the reason I'm saying that is if any of those people want to have a say now, I would love to hear from them.
Well, and also just for the point of my straw poll idea, for those of you who are fine with whether it's 2025, 2026, knowing that this is going to start immediately in terms of education and permitting language, feel free to leave it blank or say I support both. So you're welcome. If you don't have a feeling about it, that's fine.
Renee does have her hand raised.
Yeah, Renee.
Thank you. And I did want to reiterate, it's been some time since I really explained some of the concerns. And so I'm trying to kind of break out some of the bigger pieces of it. So yes, I understand it can be done. And yes, I understand that a lot of people are doing it. And yes, I have my own events that are doing all of these things. So, but in making it a citywide mandate, here are some of the challenges that I want to share with this team as part of my place on this task force. I don't know that there's enough resources on busy weekends and busy event times. We already have issues with resources when it comes to being able to hire police officers and hire security and get enough toilets and get enough dumpsters. There's been multiple times over the last couple of years where you can't, or fencing or all of these things, like there are limited resources. And so when a lot of events happen on the same weekend, we see challenges. Attendees are coming from all over. They're not just coming from Denver. And so, yes, event goers will start getting used to certain things from events, but it's not the same people who show up to all events. So I hear that, and I definitely support, getting that education piece out there. I'm just giving the kind of the other perspective there.
Yeah.
Hauler scheduling is still a huge deal. Where, can I close down an event at 10 p.m. I have to open the streets at 5 a.m. Is someone going to come and get all of the things that I need them to get in order to return to the public realm? And can that be multiplied into the entire citywide event landscape? Right now, as far as I know, and maybe this has been updated, but last I knew, compost can't currently be accepted in bags. And so you're asking for a huge event site, potentially, up to 40, 50 different food vendors. How do you do collection of compost without being able to use bags? It's a challenge. And the last point I wanted to make is that inclement weather does lead to volunteers or staff canceling out or potentially unsafe settings for your green teams. So if you're saying it's not a problem, we just put people to watch over the collection points, and there are, and we've seen it across the board where, yes, there's just times when you can't, if it's very cold, if it's rainy, if there's, and so sometimes those things can come up. I wanted to explain some of those challenges. I appreciate the one gentleman who's saying that, we should listen to the event people in the room, in the space. And so I'm happy to consider all of the different points, but I'm really asking for people to hear that as a 20-year event professional in this space, I have concerns.
Yeah. I really appreciate it, Renee. I was going to ask if you could do that anyway, but I just want to remind us in the spirit of you are all in this together, and it's important to know both all the sides, all the perspectives. And so all of you as task force members, having been privy to these conversations over the last many months, some of you have a deep stake in this. Some of you are, have a, stake in other parts of this, but just please, I take it as just good faith that all of you are sharing your perspectives and the urgency and concerns and considerations you have. So thank you, all of you. And yeah, so Christy, I'm hoping that we can move us on, but is there something that hasn't been said that you want to say real quick? And if so, please go ahead.
Sure. So it hasn't been said in this format. I can't actually recall which of the working groups, breakout meetings, et cetera, it's been said in, but sort of as reassurance to Renee's concern, I've certainly heard the perspective, and I think it's been echoed, that if an event puts a plan in place at the very least, and it turns out that service providers are not available, disposal options do not work for an event, the key is to try and put that plan in place. And all of the challenges that she mentioned, we have dealt with all of those: inclement weather, fencing off roll-offs, from a Friday night event to a Monday night pickup, et cetera, and working out budgetarily, operationally, how to make that work. But it could be an issue where we are resource stressed as a collective if every event in the Denver metro area suddenly starts implementing zero waste. But from my perspective, an event like putting the plan in place first and trying to make those connections and contract the proper service providers is key. And if in fact that service is not available or not implementable for a certain event, then one wouldn't be penalized for that.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Christy. Again, I think you teed it up, but we did identify exemptions for covered businesses, for covered events, for projects if the marketplace cannot, if they put in a good, the marketplace can't provide that. So I think it's just to provide that context. I think it's one thing to have a requirement in place, and another to say the marketplace is there and everybody's supported. There actually is a middle ground there where it's a requirement, but events are exempt or businesses are exempt because they can't acquire services. So I think in the interest of time, we're going to keep moving, but I think this has been a great conversation. And we'll have some next steps soon. We do want to get to a break. Before we do this, a couple slides I just want to cover.
And Blake, so just to clarify, so when we do the break, we will do the straw poll. And so we're going to do like 5-10 minutes before then to give you a little more context.
Again, there were some other additional improvements too. We added some budgetary estimates for just, again, to provide more sense of scale. When we talk about education, when we talk about financial supports and incentives, what are we really talking about? So those have been added. In addition, on the education side, creating toolkits for non-regulated entities. For entities that aren't covered by the ordinance, for us as a city to still encourage zero waste behavior by developing guides. Next slide. So for that really quick, on education, the range that was provided, again, this is coming from city staff, yes, but this is based on best practices, case studies in other cities, and really some just sound math of, what is a range of budgets that could help us get to success. For education, that's between 800,000 and 1.6 million a year, just for education. And then for financial supports, it's between 3 and 6 million. And it seems like it's a big number and also a big range. It really depends on the local demand for these programs. Again, with the understanding that if you're giving a $50,000 grant away, there's only so many you can, that adds up very quickly. So, but we also identified relative percentages, so you can think of them maybe as allowable uses of, just again, to give you all perspective, the proper context of the task force to determine whether this is favorable or not. Next slide. And again, I just want to extend a deep appreciation for all of you that have been really active and have been sending thoughts and comments since we did our briefing last Thursday. And I wanted to touch on some of them, and a lot of them have to do with education. But so we've created an even bigger focus or an emphasis on contamination. We've added language for the city to provide support for unions and green workforce development. Education and support for Denver schools, that was an added component. And then lastly, we kind of touched on this, and this speaks to what Brian was raising, incentives and support for early adoption for special events. So again, just because a requirement is in place and it hasn't kicked in, doesn't mean we can't encourage special events to comply. I strongly envision a zero waste event guide for the city. That is something I really look forward to getting to, and I think we'll speak to all of the best management practices on how to do it right and support all special events, including those early adopters. So hopefully we can get there quickly and have that in place by next year. Next slide. So I think this is probably a good point to break, but before we do that, are there any final questions or comments about the updated recommendations or anything that we've been talking through today?
We're gonna go into the other one, right?
Which ones? The all 13 or?
So this was gonna be my question. So, their plan was not to go through them one by one, assuming that you all have done that. But that said, Clinton, there may be some that you all want the city to take a moment. You all have these, those blue and white charts. You can ask the city to go through ones that would be helpful to understand better.
Like I emailed them.
Yeah. I mean, and I'm here too. I mean, we can talk during the break, and for those online, yeah, please email us or put comments in the chat. Just for the interest of time, we're not going to go through all the recommendations one by one, but they are available online, and we'll make sure that you can take a look at them if you want of interest.
Well, and just to be fair, first of all, acknowledging that the recommendations are a lot to review. We did try to give you guys lots and lots and lots of opportunities to review them and encouragement to, and then to asking you how you're feeling about them, just to see if there's some that needed a lot more explanation. So that was the goal, to try to get to today, having you all have reviewed them. That said, I know that they're very hard to, it's hard to get your head around them. They're in a format that's a little hard to understand. I think if you're not a reg rule ordinance person. So I think it's totally fair game to raise any that you really need more explanation on after the break. But so no, I don't mean, I think raise them now. We take a break, we'll come back and we'll discuss anything that needs further clarification. But I think what I would like to say is, like, are there any that you all do not feel ready to weigh in on at this point? And this is for people online, this is for people in the room. Are there any recommendations that at this point you don't feel ready to say, yep, I'm good, I am going to abstain, or hopefully not, I oppose, but I think it's important to hear that from you now if that's your plan, with special events aside, because you know you're going to have to plan somewhere. Yeah, Chris.
Other than a vote for an abstention or a vote against, I feel like there's been a good amount of weighing in so far today. But not necessarily any points where it feels like that weighing in will have some influence. And I'll get to that when we get to C&D, because I saw 2030 on the form. And I remember we had these 6 months staggered from each other with a pretty good, strong poll consensus. And I see standards that are in the opposite direction from what we had talked about as this committee as a whole. And events, I'm still not on board with that. Without clarification that we could find a way to create some urgency. So again, I feel like we're engaging, but I'm not sure and don't necessarily personally feel that that engagement is going to result in anything other than affirmative and abstentions, and is a vote for with the rules that you laid out in the opening. And even if there's a simple majority, that would be sufficient to remove the recommendations forward. So where is the room for us to change if there is consensus off a straw poll? I'm not sure I see that, power to motion. Where do we have room then to influence?
All right, Chris, I'm not totally understand. One thing I do understand is that C&D could use some clarification. So let's just say that's true. That needs to happen. So you have a remaining question about the special events piece, and I'm going to just see if I understood you correctly. That you guys are being asked to weigh in on, should it be 2025 or 2026? And you're saying, I think, well, it's hard for me to weigh in a meaningful way because it would help me to weigh in if I knew that this conversation we've had about creating urgency and incentives for early adopters and having requests in the permit language for a plan in 2024, that you would like to see those as part of the proposal for special events, no matter what.
We're going to take a straw poll. I'm curious to see how we're able then to action based off the results of that straw poll.
Okay.
And I'll defer any other comments.
Okay, got it.
Sorry. Yeah, and then we're happy to answer questions in the break, Chris, on C&D.
Well, and I think when we come back, there may be others. If Chris has that question, then maybe we can clarify the C&D thing. Yeah.
Just a point of clarification or information on that. C&D is 80% effective diversion by 2030. But if you go to the Denver WebGov website right now, C and D diversion plans are actively required.
And that's the part of Waste No More that already started.
Actively right now on the website, you must apply a diversion plan right now.
So thanks, everyone. We're gonna take a break for those here and virtual.
And also really just a 6-minute break, so if everyone can come back at 5 till, I know that's not much time, but we have a lot, we still have to get through today, and I want to make sure we let people leave at 5. So can we do that?
Yep.
Okay, everyone come back at 5 till, and we'll lay out the plan, the game plan for the final hour and 5 minutes. Good? So online folks, we'll see you back here in 5 minutes. I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
I just realized that we, it's okay. If you wanna do.
We'll just keep moving. We just gotta keep moving.
All right, we did.
Ian, go ahead. I see you raise your hand.
I think so.
I just want to say that I think this is one of the most transformative new policies that's come out of, or recommendations come out of this task force. And I think the petitioners are really stoked to see this make it through with recommendations.
Awesome.
Thanks, Ian.
Yeah. I'm glad we did this.
Please.
Applied to all city projects, so, city wastewater projects, they have to get recycled piping, built remodels out at DIA, because that's a city building. And there's no out for the city to not comply with this.
Well, no, so there would definitely be some cases where I think it would be hard to make it a firm requirement. And I think there's going to be a discovery process of what this could look like. Just to be candid, how I see this ultimately getting done on a broad basis is Executive Order 123. Probably that means nothing to folks in the room, but there is an executive order under the Hancock administration. It's about 11 years old, and it does have environmentally preferable purchasing requirements for the city. It needs to be looked at. It was something that was brought up both through this task force, through the mayor transition report for CASR, and in another setting too, with our sustainability advisory committee. So I think ultimately that's going to be a process of discovery, but
Wants to wait.
yes, please, Clint.
I just want to reinforce importance.
I just want to reinforce to everybody in the room the importance of this measure for the composting industry. Diversion is outpacing finished product purchasing. So what happens is, like a facility like ours, we're going to run out of space because we can't recycle, do another one, because we have to bring this back and use it. It's so, this one is so important and literally would be revolutionizing the city if we're bringing back all this amazing material and using it in the parks, using it for the resource that it is.
Yeah.
Like I can't stress this one enough. This one has to land. It has to happen. You've got to make this one work.
I'm seeing thumbs up on it, but I think hands, and before we do the hands, I just want to remind everyone we're 20 minutes to the end of this meeting. We have a few to get through, including events. So let's be quick.
One very quick comment is that the Sustainability Advisory Council has pushed CASR, and CASR has already started working on creating a green, sustainable, and water program for the city, meaning that, to your point, that we're using composting and all of these, what kind of plants are we planting and all. So all of that is being taken into account, and the city is working on that path. So this falls into that and will help.
So your question about opting out, that, I mean, certainly I understand that there might be certain areas where we can't do it. I believe our habitability is under threat here on this planet, and as long as I'm on council, I'll fight for as few exceptions as possible. So that's thought number one. The only other thought that I wanted to mention is our airport is 53 square miles. And we have the second largest airport in the world. And then Dan also reports up to the biz committee, and they are looking at some of their space to use for compost storage. So just you know, we are extending. So this group is great. We're already on council moving to help kind of support this beyond the life of this committee.
Can I tell you my next real quick?
But fast.
Guys, if we use the Denver's compost program, if we used all the finished compost that was produced from the last 3 years, that would have supplied enough top dressing for 1 year in the spring on all the parks in Denver. Like all of the material that you produce could have been used in the last 3 years in spring.
Not to say, hey, I got a bid and I can save $500,000 by not using compostable stuff, so that's what I'm gonna do. So I think we need to hold the city accountable, just like they're making all these businesses be accountable. So I just want to make sure that's in the ordinance.
Thanks, Alex.
Yeah.
Okay. No, thank you. Thank you all. I know this one has a lot of excitement around it. Okay, ready? Investment in solid waste infrastructure.
Yep, the next recommendation kind of hits the circular economy piece on on the other side of the coin. So this is called policies to support solid waste infrastructure and private sector investment. This has changed slightly since the public comment period. I'll speak to what changes we've added, but in broad terms, City and County of Denver should identify existing barriers for the private sector to site both small and large scale processing infrastructure facilities in the City and County of Denver. And so we should work to streamline and clarify permitting rules for emerging or established zero waste businesses. The one change, just kind of generally, and there's quite a bit in here, so I would encourage for this one maybe to take a close look at. But we did add language, as I mentioned before, for the City and County of Denver to identify ways to establish more local organics recycling options with an emphasis on organic screening, pre-processing, and transfer, again, to address that contamination piece. So we did add that, and that was a big outcome of the front of house conversations.
Okay. So people didn't have questions about that one before. Okay, great. All right, we've got we've got two more, and then we're gonna go to special events. So the first one is important, education, best practices and outreach.
Yep, additional support and best practices for education and outreach. There's a lot of color in here, again, for those that are really interested on this topic. In terms of actual implementation, I won't go through all of it, but broadly speaking, there are a plethora of best practices that have been identified, a lot focusing on hitting the consumer, incentivizing behavior change, tackling contamination. You know, what is the laundry list of different things that the City and County of Denver should communicate or incorporate when we do campaigns and messaging?
Yeah.
And
I've said this from the beginning, and I'm just gonna say it again. Construction and demolition recycling is a big deal. We recycle cans and then we throw away entire houses. Most cities have a dedicated staff member for C&D. Every building is built different. Our end markets are changing. Contractors are totally unaware that this is coming and it's going to take an enormous effort. So I strongly suggest the City of Denver has a dedicated staff member for C&D to help people figure out what those plans are, how to follow through, and to help educate contractors. Contractors really have no idea this is happening.
Yeah, Stephen.
The only thing that I have a challenge with on this is that it specifically only, and this is where, again, if I'm like missing it somewhere else, but it talks and discusses about union partnerships. And my members, some are union, some are not. And so I want to make sure that, like in this instance, I'm guessing it's talking about janitorial companies and such, that the non-union janitorial companies need as much education as the union ones. So I just want to make sure that we don't leave a whole sector out.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think that was the intent. I think it was just to clarify that supports for those unions should be there. But that's not to say that the non-union groups should not get that support.
With the funding and all of that, I just want to make sure that.
Yes.
I'll note it too. Do you want to say, in terms of the dedicated staff person, I mean, again, we'll note all of this, and I think it's in the summary as well, but do you want to say anything more?
Yeah, I mean, I think the growth trajectory of, our zero waste team, I think is pretty strong. And I think we clearly need, full-time staff dedicated to these, particularly when we get to the point of rolling out programs. So I think we fully plan on having someone focused on C&D fully, having somebody focused on the circular economy piece fully, education, all of these components.
I see Laura's comment and Renee's, but yeah, echoing Anna's comments. Okay, and we'll emphasize all these as well in the notes. Okay, are we good on that one? Or there? So I think I'm seeing yeses, no. Okay, perfect. All right, financial support.
Create financial support programs. This one has changed from, although somewhat from the public comment, but broadly speaking, this is about the task force recommending City and County of Denver to create financial support programs, support successful implementation of Waste No More. This would include things like non-competitive grants, other financial supports to offset, hauling costs for the training of staff. And I'll just note that one of the big, like the education best practices, there's quite a bit of language in here about different types of programming, with the goal of this really going to the communities and the businesses that need it most. One big thing that we added, just again to provide more context of what this recommendation really means at scale, is asking for that recurring budget in the range of $3 million to $6 million in the implementation years of 2025 to 2027. And then we identify where that money should go to, which largely reflects what this task force, I think, wanted, which is offsetting container signage and education costs, subsidizing hauling service costs for affordable housing and small businesses, supporting on-site reuse and organics recycling for food service businesses, and then zero interest small business loans for emerging zero waste startups.
Anyone have any questions or further comments on that one, which is obviously a really important one as well? Saying all of this is. Okay, yeah, agreed.
I guess I'm just surprised that you would, kind of earmark those that budget for these, that I'm just wondering how evergreen it is for you to be doing that, and if that should be more of a rulemaking process, so that you have the flexibility to respond to the needs as you're implementing.
Yeah, it's a great point. So, I think this is a tough one. We wanted to try to give a sense of scale to, to city council to say, this is a range of what we think in terms of how, because it's a range, we wanted to say, hey, based on where we land, these are sort of the relative importances of these different categories. But I mean, we would leave that to city council to determine, and the mayor with the budget process of, okay, here's the budget. Now where should it really go? Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, it's a great question.
Okay. So here's what from my main point here, reading over now with the shoulder, it seems to me like we have consensus on all of these, except for on a couple of the C&D ones, we have consensus by the funds, the reasons that were shared, in terms of wanting to be more aggressive. And then we have the special events one to go. And so here's my proposal. And again, we have 10 minutes. Oh yeah, that's the minute. Oh, did I miss that? I'm sorry. Oh, Murphy, do you want to say anything about that? I don't.
Not sure. I think just the timeline of 9 and 10 and how, I was thinking about Ian's comment of how, voters passed this with the 2022 implementation timeframe, and now we had a small segment of people take this survey, and even that survey, 45% of them said that it wasn't aggressive enough, and the timeline of 6, 12, 18, I think, months that we came up with in the last task force meeting, I don't think necessarily had a lot of analysis behind it. I think I had proposed that just because we were cutting down the 24 months to an 18 months, but it was fairly arbitrary. And so I'm wondering if we should revisit that.
Thought that was similar to what Austin did.
I think I remember that exact comment. I remember discussing the phrase after the meeting, and I know that was also a time of transition. So
yeah, so just based on the feedback, the 45%, I think it's not aggressive enough. I think maybe which is why I voted no.
Okay. So it sounds like for those we're calling this consensus minus one, but in both cases it's because there's task force members who were hoping to be more aggressive and are hoping to be more aggressive. And I think that that's an absolutely, important message we can include in this report to explain that. And then, thank you. And so then getting into the special events, one, I think what we have are 2 disruptions that is there. So, Friday 5 feet. And so I think this is my proposal, and Chris, I'm going to say this because I know you had a question about it. I'm proposing that you all go ahead and take it, which would be your preference? And we can do this based on what you all say. We can do this twice. Once, just right now in this moment, where are you landing slightly in terms of assuming all the things are constant, that there's going to be incentivizing early adopters, that, like Rose said, who's in this office of special events, this is going to be rolled out in the upcoming applications. And assume those are all constant, and the only difference is this is required as of January 2025, or this is required as of January 26th. We've already said enforcement is going to be a light touch at first, and it's going to be education heavy. And everyone just write your preference. All task force members write your preference, and then we're going to look at them together. If anyone wants to say anything about what they're noting, and then if folks want to take it again, depending on what they're seeing, the masses, gravitate towards, that's fine. We can do that too. Yeah, Councilman Wingo.
Can we just use column 2 and then put it in 2025 or 2026?
Yeah. So Councilman Hines, no, totally. Thank you for clarifying. So if you go to 5,
shows up twice. First one's 2025. Okay.
no, thank you for you were not the only one with that clip. So everyone, if you could put, it's a little, you're gonna have to put either you abstain from both of them if you have no dog in this fight and you really don't abstain, or you're gonna put yes or no, respectively.
Well, what you just said.
Wait.
Up 2% there, where you said enforcement's gonna be light. So what scares me about what you just said, that means contamination may be heavy.
Oh, okay. Rose, and someone from the should reframe what I just said, because when I said contamination is light, all I meant was when you all wrote your enforcement recommendation, it was with a focus on education, heavy focus on education.
I guess, please clarify, she did not mean enforcement will be lightly handled. Fines will come later. It is heavy on education first during that enforcement process. So
thank you.
It'll be our
said from the record. Instead, what Anna and Rosa did that.
Ian, you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
I just want to be clear that the suggestion I made for 2025 is not a phased approach for large events. It's all at once, but it's still 2025.
Correct.
And they both read as phased on the voting.
So that's just the original title of that recommendation. Within the recommendation, it does list.
I think more than anything, Ian, it speaks to just that there is some time of a trend. There's some transition. So I think we can definitely improve on that title
But just to be clear, and Ian, thank you very much for clarifying this, there is no phasing all events go. Or either one of these.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna just. And it's totally, completely fine for those of you who just do not want to weigh in.
I know there's a lot going on. I've got my hand up. I just want to
Oh,
chime in.
Renee, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. One piece that I'm seeing on the recommendation for both on number 5 of whether it's a low, medium, or high expense for the city and or regulated entities, that's a pretty vague answer. And it's the exact same for both. And so
which part? Sorry, Renee?
section 5.
Because if we're changing the recommendations, we have to.
Okay.
It just says that it's expected to be lower, but we all know the cost will actually be higher. So it kind of is a little misleading.
Well, so Renee, I think in fairness, we're proposing a new recommendation on the spot here. And so we would obviously, depending on where we land today, go back and revisit the equity rubric and update that depending on where we landed. If it's 2025, then that would necessitate the equity rubric to be updated.
For sure. And I think both of the recommendations, whether it's 2025 or 2026, both of those definitions, and I'm sorry I didn't catch it sooner, but both of those where it says, by the end of the 2-year implementation period, the cost of service for permitted event operators is expected to be lower because the demand will be spread out over time. So it really ignores the fact that there will be a cost increase for event organizers to implement this.
Yes, I think it was relative to the original ordinance language, which had all events immediately. So in that spirit, this would be a lower cost over time because it was not an immediate thing. So I think that was written. It was written respective of the original ordinance language. Yeah, but still a good point. I mean,
Thanks for raising it. And here is what I'm gonna propose here. It's 1 minute till 5, or maybe 2. So by my count, there are 10 of you who support the 2025. There are 4 of you who support the 2026. Everyone else is abstaining. I mean, what I'm hearing, and again, these are recommended, would be what goes in the recommendation, that you all achieved consensus, including consensus minus 1 in a couple of instances, except for special events, which was very complicated, lots of different pros and cons and trade-offs. We had, lots of representation from different sectors of important and relevant interests, and that there was, in the end, you all had to take a majority vote on this one, and this is how it landed. Many of you abstained because you defer. And so I think this is how it's going to be reflected in the recommendations, that it landed with 2025 being, preferential among the folks who voted. And so this would be, say it again. Yeah, so this is majority. So this would be the majority. So rather than you all having to vote again, you have just voted. And this would be my recommendation, my proposal to you all at this point is that you have just taken a majority, you have just taken a vote on this particular special events proposal because it was complicated, and the majority voted in favor of 2025. And that would be your message to council. Councilman Hines.
Council, I mean, all these recommendations come first. Yeah. Isn't this a fabulous result that a majority of the items are unanimous? We have 4, I think, items that are unanimous plus 1 or minus 1. So nearly unanimous, and it's only one of the 14 recommendations that's controversial, and the controversy is just a date. So so I really want to thank all of you for spending so much time. You know, obviously we had the meetings, but then all the research and homework in advance of the meetings. But this is a lot of work. Yeah.
I think that was a really helpful way to wrap up what we just did. It was intense and took time, and I appreciate it.
I just want to, because like I said earlier, I think though that vote should tell the city staff that this is an area that they're going to need to do a lot of focus and or either a lot of hand holding, because it was the only one that wasn't a consensus. And so I just think that that's important. I think for you guys, that when you talk to city council, help them understand why those resources are going to be important for that piece, because again, there was a lot of concern about it.
Yeah, and I want everyone to know, like, we were listening loud and clear to a lot of the like the back rationales about helping people come up to compliance and the like all the complexities around that. So I completely understand. I understand why that vote just was split as closely as it was, and we'll carry that back.
And we'll carry back the nature of who voted what. You know, so like I think the CRA, BOMA. There were the industry has concerns about quick implementation. I think we want to know who has the concerns too, right? So that's an important data point to bring to colleagues.
Can I talk to Councilwoman and Councilman just for a couple minutes?
Okay. So some of you are going to the happy hour, but before you do, we have like 2 slides that really talk about next steps.
Yeah.
And I think you guys are going to want to know that.
Okay, Renee says disagree with moving forward majority vote because it was on the fly without opportunity to discuss with community.
Yeah, I felt a little rushed too long.
So
Yeah, and I just feel like because of the division, like it's showing how many people this affects.
Yeah.
It's showing how important it is. But at the flip side, if it's done well, it's going to really bring a lot of benefit to everybody. But if it's done wrong, it's going to work in the reverse effect and work against all of us.
Yep.
And that's why I think it's like, I agree, it's rushed a little bit. I think this could be.
I was gonna say something that might make us feel more comfortable is to really, Renee put in what would happen in that year 25. If the city has like education plan, what's the budget? What are you doing with that? Maybe that would help people to understand what are the tangible things that are going to happen in 2025. If those aren't really tangible things, then let's just face our fears and do it in 2025. But if let's define actually what would happen in that year and who's doing it. And if there's no real clear plan, then right? And so so in the spirit of both offering closure, but also addressing some of what Renee and the 3 of you, I think, just said, once we characterize it as we took a majority vote for purposes of bringing this to closure, yet there were a number of people very strongly feeling like this needs, they would feel much more comfortable with some more clarity on if the deadline is, if the cutoff date by compliance has to happen is January 2025, what's happening in the next year? If it's 2026, what's happening in the 2 years before? Is that what you're saying? And laying that out really clearly and having some way to digest it and discuss it in some forum?
Yeah, and most people want to just have it happen now, but we need to know, and the other people who want to postpone it are worried about contamination or budgeting or all the issues. So they think 1 year will really help them. Let's define, and Renee put in the chat how she thinks it'll help them. But like, can we define what the city supports would happen in that year and make it really clear so we know what we're talking about?
Okay, because it sounds like there's some of you who are inclined to 2025 at this point who might aren't totally sure and felt rushed.
And you have your hand raised?
And also Megan has had her hand raised for a while.
Yeah, just what I would want to say by that standard, we couldn't have made any changes to any of the recommendations today if they have to go back and be vetted by other people. I think that we have the rules of six, of majority vote that govern this from the very beginning. I don't know why we would go back on the rules that are governing what we've had before. As we found a way to try to create some compromise that got us to a majority from the 2026 to 2025.
I see Megan, yeah. I know. Okay, sorry.
So I am a city staffer, not a part of the task force. I work in the Office of Special Events, but I want to speak to this idea, which I actually really like, because it's confusing when we say like this is required moving forward, but we're like not really going to enforce it or enforce it lightly. Like I think it's helpful to event organizers if we break it out and say like in 2024, like a plan is required and the city is going to commit to collecting a waste management plan from every event organizer. And then in 2025, like, you have to implement it or you have to have this. And then in 2026, like full compliance, enforcement, like all of that. So I appreciate that suggestion. And I think it's kind of like rewriting everything, I realize, but it's hard to say like, this is required by 2025, but then like backpedal it and like not enforce it or enforce it lightly or have them not be able to do it or not do it correctly. And so I think that is something worth exploring, like doing it right,
I mean, again, and this person bringing me closer to this, sorry, thank you. If the recommendations are recommendations to council, and if the recommendations say, look, we took this majority vote because it was the last meeting and we were rushed. I mean, whatever, we're not going to say it quite the way, but we have, we asked the city to provide a little more explanation of what this would look like and have that all contained in the report to go to council. And the two council members who are going to be the biggest champions are I think have a nuanced view of this topic. And if we can lay out whatever we can lay out in the report to help you all, you understand that, yes, the task force voted on this and the majority voted one way, but it was at the final hour. There were a lot of remaining questions and people asked for more information to be laid out on the report. And then is that fair?
Yeah, and in addition, I think we can provide the city staff some context of, in either scenario, what would need to happen for success to be achieved.
Yep.
Right. So if city council went in one direction or another, what would need to take place to get to where everyone wants to? And I think that's something that we can take on and we'll be focusing very intently on. Councilmember Hines, please.
Hopefully it doesn't die.
Okay.
So I think a question at the beginning of this meeting was, will there still be lobbying? I just want to circle back to that. And for all recommendations but one, I'll vigorously defend the decision of the committee. So just, there's one recommendation where, we're talking about right now, but just to bring it back home to I think you brought up the concern, right? Or the question, like the committee came up to a strong consensus on everything but this one. And so if anyone comes and lobbies about some change in any of them, I'll say no. The committee came together and he met over an extended period of time, did a lot of work. We're not all being compensated because we're on the Waste No More Task Force. We're here because we're passionate. Maybe we're representing people, but this isn't in our core job description to be here today. And so, I want to reflect that too. And so if someone just shows up later and says, hey, council, we should do something else, I'll say, this is the process. I want to protect the process.
Well, I'm wondering if what you just said, as far as staff with the clarification of the 25 to 26 piece, I'm wondering if that came out to the task force prior to city council, would that change any of the abstentions to a yes one way or another or not? That might give more clarification to where that might be an opportunity to get that vote a little bit more boxed.
Yeah, I think this is thanks, Stephen. I think we can talk about the next steps here. We're going to be drafting order. Okay. Sorry for folks online. Just in terms of next steps as we close out, we're going to be briefing the mayor's office on the outcomes of this task force. We're going to be drafting ordinance language. We are going to offer a check-in meeting for the task force. We don't know when that's going to be. A lot of it has to do with when we can put that report together. But in that report, we would ideally we would be providing that draft report to task force members to respond to prior to, and maybe that includes some action in response to what we've put together. And then in addition, there's going to be a focus group with our marketing firm to inform citywide campaign development. This is something I was alluding to before. We're going to invite all task force members to the best of our ability to join us in that focus group and help us understand what our campaign should look like and how it should be, who we should reach. We're also going to be offering quarterly stakeholder working groups for 2024 and 2025. So on the topics of organics recycling, on construction and demolition, solid waste infrastructure, and education enforcement, we're going to be meeting quarterly. So this would be next year. Again, just to check in with you all, make sure that we're doing what we're supposed to, that any new ideas or opportunities created. And then there'll be the rules and regs process, likely in early to mid 2024, which again is another opportunity.
I think there was one right before that, Blake. That was a little bit of just a visual.
Yeah, just the
Okay.
visual, but I think we're at
great.
time. So again, thank you everybody for you all here and online. I mean, let's just again give us a little round. I just want to extend my great appreciation on behalf of City and County of Denver for your involvement, and we're going to do our best to close this out. And we'll be working closely with city council members and the mayor's office to make sure this all works well. So thank you all. For those here, love to see you at Wood Brews Brewery for happy hour. And for those online, thank you. And we'll talk soon.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks everyone.
These are upcycled vinyl reusable bags.